Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Hey, welcome back to the Larry Yates Here Show. Open your eyes real wide because I know this is going to shock you. This is Larry Yates in the house. I have been avoiding you guys. I got those terrible emails and I took off running and I got away from you. No, I'm just kidding. I think, I got some wonderful emails from everybody. Not everybody. Some of you have been holding out. My email address is, Larry Yates, LARRY. YATESASIS@AOL.com. And that's spelled Larry Yates as is at AOL.com. Hit me up and find me on Facebook as well. Anyway, thank you guys. Everybody been really, really good. And, I'm glad to be back on the show. I've been doing a little bit of traveling and want to talk to you. We got some excellent guests here. Carolyn, we got to give her some thanks because she's always bring some excellent quality guests to the show. And that's kind of what we want to do, stay in the line of quality, and she's been really, really helping us stay there. And with my little traveling, and I left the country in you guys' hand. You were supposed to deal with Donald Trump, and I leave the state. It's almost like I left the country. Because I come back and this man is still going strong and blah, 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 blah. And don't you just love the trip he took to Mexico? Absolutely wonderful. Beautiful, the most beautiful thing I ever seen. This man, I am not going to bite my tongue. And those of you that listen to the show, you know I love you, and you have every right to disagree with me, although you're wrong. And I don't have a problem with you being wrong, because the only time I'm not going right is when I made a left turn, but I made the right decision. Oh, I know you're going to steal that one right there. But anyway, I actually had a great trip to the East Coast, and now I'm back here in L.A. enjoying this West Coast weather, because it was hot as heck in Philly. And so this has been really good. I'm kind of pontificating here just a little bit because I don't want to get too far off on Donald Trump right now. We're going to come back to him. But I want to give some shout out to many of you that wrote in, was still talking about the police officers. And so that's still kind of heavy in Texas and some of the death that's been around there. And then my heart goes out to, I think, Louisiana and the storms, and I think Florida is kind of in trouble right now. So those of you that believe in prayer, let's do it. Those of us just believe in meditation, let's do it. And those of us just believe in looking at car tires and say, do something for me. Hey, whatever you believe in, do it, because the country on the weather thing in the South down there, people are suffering from there. But anyway, we're going to move on from this because we got a good show here. Going to deal with a little bit of politics and what's going to be a little bit. I'm going to let Carolyn introduce everybody because by me being the saint, I don't talk about these things. But anyway, Carolyn, thanks a lot. You, I know I'm silly. That's just who I am. But I want to thank you for holding the show up. Thank you so much, and got a lot of good emails about your show. And I got to watch some of your last show. That was good. So how have you been?
I've been good.
Yeah.
Had a lot of conversations about lots of different things, and got to meet our guests a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And so being blessed with having wonderful people in my life. I keep meeting more and more wonderful people, which helps to minimize or diminish the impact of what I see on the news. So
Okay.
I'm always looking at having balance.
Yeah, and that's a key word, balance, because right now, with things seeming to be so off-centered, and I think that's one of the things that most of us are trying to do, both mentally, spiritually, physically, and politics and religion, trying to find that balance. So without further ado, as they say in the showbiz, for the sake of time, why don't we move in and you introduce the guests, introduce a little bit about them. Tell us a little bit.
Okay. Well, our show is entitled today Marijuana, Drug and Criminal Justice Reform. I thought that would get your attention.
Yes.
And if you're, in fact, imbibing in the medicinal version of this, you may not have our attention. But anyway, we'll have you listen in on some of the more important points of what's happening around the country and is up for a ballot in California. And our guests today are Lynne Lyman. She's the California State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance and has been involved in putting Prop 64 on the ballot in California and has been involved in working across the country in other states and seeing what they're doing. And we also have Zach Leary, who's a podcast host, a writer, a brand strategist, and an all-around good guy. And if you think you may know that name, you do, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. So we'd like to welcome Lynne and Zach to the show. Can we give them a rousing round of applause?
Lynne.
Good to be here. Thank
Hi.
you.
How are you guys doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
I'm feeling kind of buzzed. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
That was because we switched out the coffee, remember?
I couldn't resist that. Tell us, Lynne, what are we looking at with this proposition?
So Prop 64 will be on the November 8th ballot, and it fully legalizes recreational marijuana for adults 21 and over, and creates a commercial system for the distribution, cultivation, manufacture, distribution of legal marijuana. At the same time, it's a massive sentencing reform initiative. So it reduces just about all marijuana penalties that are currently on the books. And it's applicable retroactively, meaning anybody who has a marijuana record back to the beginning of time will be able to have the record changed. Anybody who's in jail will most likely be able to be released. And there's a lot of pieces of this I'd love to talk about, some reparative justice components, some of the revenue allocation, what it means for our young people. So there's a lot in Prop 64. It's going to do a lot for the state.
To the best of your knowledge, how did we get to the point where marijuana is so demonized?
Well, the prohibition of marijuana is absolutely based in institutional racism and oppression, as is the prohibition of all the major drugs. So if you look at the origins of our drug laws, our drug prohibition laws, they're all based on a particular minority that we were trying to marginalize and oppress at the time. Marijuana goes back primarily to Mexican immigrants, migrant workers who were coming up to do a lot of the farm labor in the 20s and 30s. And as a way to control them, we made marijuana illegal in 1935. We did the same with heroin to control the Chinese immigrants who were building the railroads in San Francisco. And we did the same thing with cocaine as a way to criminalize and control black people who were coming up in the Great Migration from the South. So all of our drug laws are based in some very intentional and institutional racism.
Now, let me ask you a question. Within the demonization of marijuana, and going back, there's lots of information out there about the tobacco company being involved in it and the alcohol business being involved in demonizing it. Does that have any validity to it?
Not a whole lot. They certainly haven't helped. But if you look at, the way the money flows against our work and other folks who do the kind of work we do, it's not necessarily coming from alcohol or tobacco. Really where it's coming from is law enforcement. The law enforcement lobby, the cops, the sheriffs, the district attorneys associations, they're the ones who are constantly opposing any kind of reform efforts.
Who stand to lose and who stand to gain with the changes of these laws?
So if you look at the way our marijuana laws have been applied in California, across the country, but I'm going to speak to California because that's my expertise, that's my little jurisdiction.
There you go.
So I'll let other people talk about the rest of the country. But in California, if you're black, you're 5 times more likely to get a marijuana felony than if you're white, even though white people use and sell marijuana at slightly higher rates. Mm-hmm. So we have been enforcing our marijuana laws in an incredibly discriminatory way for a long time, and also against Latinos, first and foremost against Black Californians, and then really growing discrimination against Latinos. So who stands to benefit? Black and brown young men, first and foremost, since they're the folks who are persecuted for something that we all do. Mm-hmm. I think that our state budget stands to benefit. It will save hundreds of millions of wasted dollars in law enforcement trying to prosecute and arrest marijuana offenses. I think our young people will benefit. It makes marijuana harder to access for young people. It also protects young people from a criminal record.
What has been the greatest challenge to this point?
The cops.
So
law enforcement lobby.
Law enforcement lobbies.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't the law enforcement lobbies not want something better to help the criminal system to take the weight off of their hands, since they say, according to the police department, that they are overtasked with so many different things. This is coming from the police department, that they shouldn't be babysitters of the community. They shouldn't have to come out and clean up the community with mops, brooms, and brushes and stuff. They need to focus on hard crime or whatever. Why wouldn't they support this?
And cops do say that, and it is true that they shouldn't be sort of the only, the last people standing in communities. On the other hand, what they won't do is let go of any of their budget. And so government services is all about budget allocation. And right now, most money goes into law enforcement. And if they really don't want to be those social workers, they're going to have to give up a little sliver of their budget and let that go to the social worker budget or the sanitation budget. But I believe that why law enforcement lobby is so opposed to drug law reforms and criminal justice reform. I think it's about jobs for them. So,
there's no question about that.
Well,
I mean,
it's about jobs. It's about jobs.
See what you had to say about it.
We're seeing eye to eye here.
Yeah,
it's about
no
jobs.
About it.
Well, I'm wondering, is it also about control? Because it also gives them the wherewithal, the police, the wherewithal to enter into spaces of cars and homes and other things with the potential situation of people having drugs on them.
Well, I don't know. I think, I don't know. Please, would you like to
about control, I would just say absolutely. There's an element of all of our drug laws have given law enforcement and the government, if you want to call it that, much more access to our personal lives, what we do in our personal space. Yeah. So I do think there's an element of control, that is under the sort of veneer of public safety.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is we've used the term marijuana, for instance, as a gateway to drug addiction and blah, blah, blah. But marijuana has been a gateway to the penal system.
Absolutely.
And that's the gateway to the penal system. And when you're dealing with the penal system, you have judges that has benefited from it. You have the court, the prison system that's benefiting from it. The jail system benefited from it. You have lawyers that's benefiting from it. You have policemen that's benefiting from it. Mm-hmm. So you have a huge economic interest in keeping it criminal. And I'm sorry, Zach, you wanted to say something?
And even backing up, I mean, what you're saying, even to support that fact, even backing up to one step just right before that, what Carolyn was saying is that, drug laws, recreational drug laws are what have written modern search laws for personal property search laws within your car and on your person. All of those modern laws were created around trying to find somebody who had recreational drugs on them. What else would they be looking for? This leads to searching your car. This leads to
Yes.
the entry into the criminal justice
Zach,
system.
introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi. Yeah, my name's Zach. Zach Leary. I'm podcaster, writer, speaker, technical strategist.
Tell us
Yeah.
how this became so dear to your heart.
Well, I guess it sort of became dear to my heart. Well, in a number of ways. One, directly through my family lineage. My father was one of the first casualties in the war on drugs in the 1960s, and he ended up doing 4 years of prison time for marijuana that was planted on him.
Tell us your father's name.
Yeah, his name was Timothy Leary.
Yes.
And, granted, his infamy was a lot more complicated than just planting marijuana on him. I get that, but what that did, his case, what happened in 1966 through 1968, was really the predecessor to the modern war on drugs, and it's what
well-known case.
Yeah, the very well-known case, and then Richard Nixon ended up calling him the most dangerous man in America, which then created what we now know as the war on drugs. That's the beginning of my interest in it. But then secondarily, I'm a recovering substance abuse user and have dabbled in the criminal justice system more than probably I care to admit, from decades ago, from misspent youth. And having a little taste of that life and kind of seeing firsthand how the criminal justice system works on the inside.
Welcome.
Just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Yes. I mean, everything from seeing how there are two criminal justice systems. There's the one for rich white people, and there's the one for poor black people.
Oh, there's no question about it.
There's no question about it. And just seeing that go on and seeing everybody in the LA County Jail is in there for drugs for one way or another. They may be in there for breaking and entering, but they're in there because they needed to break and enter to go get money to get drugs. So it's a very complicated issue.
I'm going to walk very fine lines here. I won't speak of any of my run-ins with the law, so I'm not even going to go there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Maybe I think about it. But I do know, working with so many young people, and how, in fact, I know so many young people that went to jail for a joint, a small $5 bag of weed, which really wasn't even really marijuana. I don't even know what they call that crap when we was in. It's like, no, honestly, coming up in the ghetto, and
oregano or something.
And I visited the ghetto a few times. It was called Mississippi, South Central. I grew up around these areas, and I'm not saying I smoked anything. I just picked it up. And when I got into the entertainment industry around wealthy people, and going back to my neighborhood and where there was very poor people, I saw the marijuana that these musicians were smoking, and I looked at the marijuana in the street. I'm like, wait a minute. You call this marijuana? They're giving you 10 years for this? It's not even marijuana. That's the good stuff. Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm getting off on that.
I'd love to jump in on what how we're going to protect young people from the criminal justice system with this law, because that is a very important piece. So children will no longer go to jail for marijuana in California. After November 8th. At midnight, no child can go to jail for any marijuana activity after November 8th if we win.
Is that 18 and under?
It's 17 and under in California, minors. Okay. And at age 18, their record will be sealed so that they can go into adulthood with a clean record. So, there's a lot of talk about protecting kids from marijuana. We don't want our kids to use marijuana, but what we really need to protect our kids from is the criminal justice system. Yes. And so we do both with Prop 64.
That's a revolving door, isn't
it?
Yeah.
It sure is. So, there are two doorways from my point of view. There are two doorways into looking at this proposition. One, there's criminal justice reform. Two, there's the civil libertarian aspect, which is, you can argue, does somebody have the right to ingest marijuana who gives you the right to tell me what I can't put in my body? There's that aspect as well. I think the much more pragmatic, practical, logical, rational way to go is through criminal justice reform, because what we're seeing in the world today, with all of our world's problems today, and there's so many serious issues going on in the world today, we cannot seriously look at each other in the eye and devote all of these resources into fighting marijuana. And it's insane. So it's time to stop the insanity.
Right now, as the laws go, you see these marijuana dispensaries and where you can go to the doctors and get the prescriptions and stuff. Yeah. First, let me ask you, how effective is that?
Well, it's not effective because we never regulated medical marijuana. So we legalized medical marijuana in 1996 in California. And the state government was supposed to then create regulations. They never did, just out of cowardice, until last year, and those haven't gone into effect yet. So when you see dispensaries everywhere, if the city didn't take it upon itself to create a regulatory system, which the city of LA never did, many cities did not, you just have sort of the chaos of dispensaries popping up and they're not licensed and their product isn't safe. So the system hasn't worked because of a failure of our state leadership to create a regulatory system.
Yeah. Under this system's so-called legal marijuana, what's the age limit of a...
Currently? Currently, medical marijuana is legal for adults 18 and over.
18 and over.
Recreational marijuana will be legal for adults 21 and over, like alcohol.
Would it be on one of the same kind of systems?
Well, the systems, there'll be separate licensing. It'll come from the same bureau and be regulated by the same government agencies, but you will get a different license if you're a medical business versus a recreational business.
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Okay.
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I'm a small-time grower. I'm making a good living now. I can pay for whatever. But then if the government get involved, they're going to put me out of business, and then the big growers are going to control the distribution of the product, the growth and the distribution of the product.
Yeah, you've hit right on a red hot button issue for a lot of the current growers. So folks who are already in the industry are not necessarily pro-legalization, right? This is working out just fine for them because they essentially, have a monopoly on a gray market. It's dangerous. Many of them spend half their time in court, but they make enough money to make it worth it. So legalization isn't necessarily for the growers. It's really for, I would say, first and foremost, it is about decriminalizing the system and taking that out of the system altogether. It's about getting people out of jail. It's about keeping people from going into jail. It's about changing people's records so they can change their lives. And secondly, it's about the consumer. I'm a marijuana consumer. I use cannabis every single day. And I want to know what's in my product like anything else. I want to know if it was grown organically. I want to know if they use pesticides, if there's any molds. I want my stuff tested. So that does not behoove the industry, but that does behoove the consumer. So I would say that the industry have been, despite a lot of the claims that the money behind this is coming from the industry, they're some of the weakest supporters.
And so oversight, I know what I really get. Oversight as far as health concerns of the quality and what you're getting in your product is very, very important. Now, does this Prop 64 consider that oversight?
Absolutely. It creates a full regulatory system. There's a new Bureau of Marijuana Control that's being created. The Department of Public Health will oversee the testing. The Department of Food and Agriculture will manage the cultivation. And I did want to say one more piece about the big business. We did put a little something in there to give the small farmers a head start. A 5-year ban on any big businesses. So to give that 5-year head start for the small farmers. And then even after that ban expires, first of all, it could be extended if the legislature wants to do that. But even if it isn't, anti-monopoly provisions are written into the entire initiative. So the regulators have to consider, is this going to lead to a monopoly, to a big business taking it over? Also, residency requirements are included. So again, you can't have people coming from out of state and trying to take over the industry.
Well, now I know this is going to be another flame thrown on this. Funding. How is this going to be funded?
You mean the campaign itself
Yes.
or the revenue? So we're raising money from everyday citizens. In fact, if your listeners want to give us $5, we'll take it. LegalizeCA2016.com. But, you know, it costs a lot more than $5, you know,
Well,
per
that
person.
that and I get that, and please support this. I'm all for supporting this. So any of you that can throw in. So what is the website?
LegalizeCA2016.com.
Okay, but now I'm speaking for the taxpayer. It's going to fall on me as a
the taxpayer.
taxpayer.
Like, meant
But
funding
no,
the
that was
campaign.
great.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
glad you answered it as far as the support and the funding for that
the
cause. So
campaign.
I most definitely support that, and the Larry Yates' shows is most definitely
Thank you.
want that. But now
Once we win.
yeah, now I'm switching and being a taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer. What is it going to cost me?
I have the
Cost
best.
you for what do you mean? Cost you for what? What?
Of
On
these
what end?
agencies and this
Oh, I
government,
got it.
all of these
I
agencies.
have the best
and,
news for you. As a taxpayer, you're about to get some money into your community from marijuana legalization. We're going to raise $1 billion a year in tax revenue. We didn't make that estimate. The government legislative analysts made that estimate. And that money is going to go into a number of things. First, to cover the cost of regulation, which is less than $100 million, much less. Some of the money is going to go into research. Some of the money is going to go into cleaning up the environment from all the damage from the illegal grows. And then we have something special in this initiative that's never happened before. We have a reparative justice component. It's a $50 million community reinvestment fund. $50 million every year goes back into those communities that have been hit hardest by the war on drugs. So high arrest rates, high incarceration rates, those communities are going to get that money to invest in the things that they prioritize. There's also a big chunk of money going into drug treatment, prevention, after-school programs, homeless street outreach. Yeah, we're making a lot of money for the taxpayer.
Now, I have a couple of questions. And one is in regard to the impact of bad marijuana. So just last week in the LA area, there were something like 25 to 40 people who had to be taken to the hospital because of bad drugs. So I'm wondering any thoughts on that. And then the second is when you talk about the people who are most affected, who are blacks and Mexicans, there's this person who's running for presidency who has an issue with people, I believe, of color, and is wanting to push people out of the system and to have a high impact on what we do with our police, because that's part of his campaign. Yeah. So what do you think the impact is of the Trump movement on what we're trying to do right now?
Do you want to start with that one, then I'll take the first question?
I mean, the impact of the ultimately, I think, and it's kind of hard to see it now, but ultimately, I think the impact of the Trump movement helps this cause, because what short term, and it's most unfortunate, and there's no question of the destruction that it's done to our society. The Trump movement has sort of given this free pass for people to come out of the closet and be racist. Mm-hmm. They've already been there.
Yes. To
be xenophobic, to be, anti-immigration. And it's like, oh, okay, now we have like this free pass to all of a sudden say we feel this way. But at the end of the day, he's not going to win. It's not going to pass. And I think in the end, the backlash, it's just going to end up on the wrong side of history. So I think sanity is going to prevail.
So, but my question is also, is there any movement afoot that would get in the way of Prop 64 with the kind of rhetoric he has right now?
Well, you have Sheldon.
Yeah, well, a lot of Trump supporters also support marijuana legalization. Mm-hmm. So we're not as worried about his supporters. Okay. What we are worried about is if he wins, because, of course, Prop 64 doesn't change anything about federal law. Mm-hmm. But under the Obama administration, they have a hands-off approach. They say, we won't mess with your state if you're experimenting with marijuana laws. Now, it took us a while to get there, but that's what governs things now. But a new president could say, we're coming in with the FBI and the DEA, and we're going to come in with SWAT teams and wipe out your small farmers. So we're really worried about what could happen depending on who wins. But I'll go to your first question about the recent spate of sickenings along in Skid Row. And it's not marijuana.
Okay.
People call it synthetic marijuana because they have no other name for it. It's potpourri sprayed with chemicals. And if marijuana was legal, people would not be smoking potpourri. So people smoke potpourri because A, it's legal.
and it's cheap,
B,
yes.
it doesn't show up in a drug test. And most of those people living on the street get drug tested so they can get their benefits or whatever else. So
Well, explain to the audience what is potpourri.
potpourri, you know, that little smelly stuff people have in their
No, I
bathrooms.
don't
Like
know.
it's just basically like
It's like dried flowers.
Like
and
thank you, dried
dried
flowers and stuff.
You buy this at the head shop?
So you can buy right. So and the worst response to what's happening in Skid Row would be to then criminalize those different things. Some of them are called K2, some are called spice, because two things. One is that the law enforcement will never catch up with the chemists. You make one drug component
Yes, that
illegal,
makes a
they'll
lot of
add in
sense.
another one. And each time they do that, the drug gets more dangerous, and we know less about it. So we know a lot about marijuana's effects, how to use it safely, how to do this, how to do that. With spice and these synthetic drugs, we just don't know. And if we make that drug, which there's a bill on the governor's desk, which I hope he vetoes, to criminalize spice, it's the worst approach we could do. Of course, we don't want it in our communities, but criminalizing it just puts all those homeless people in jail. It's not useful.
Yes. Thank you.
Wow. Let me ask you, now I'm being devil's advocate again. For those that because I'm with you now. I'm just looking at how some of my Californians think. And recreational pharmaceuticals, and when you're dealing with marijuana, then the next person wants to legalize hallucinogens. Why shouldn't the hallucinogens not be legalized in marijuana? What gives marijuana that edge that it should be legalized above the rest?
So marijuana, a couple things that make it sort of separate from the others.
Did that question make sense?
It totally makes sense, and our mission is way beyond marijuana. Drug Policy Alliance is trying to end the war on drugs. Marijuana legalization is just one little piece of that work. The reason why we deal with it kind of separately is twofold. One, more Americans use it than any other illicit drug. And Obama even said you can't criminalize something that most people use. That's a really bad public policy.
It's a civil war.
It becomes a civil war. Secondly, marijuana is one of the safest psychoactive substances there is. It doesn't mean it's fully safe under any condition for anybody, but of psychoactive substances, which includes alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, etc., marijuana is much, much safer, and most medical professionals say that. So that's what makes it different. And that's why we want to fully legalize it, more like alcohol or tobacco. With other drugs, though, we do need to decriminalize them. We're not sure if we should legalize them, pharmaceuticalize them, what it may be.
Give me an example of another drug.
Heroin should be decriminalized. So, and there is an example of this happening in another country. In Portugal, decriminalized all drugs. You cannot go to jail for drug use in Portugal. And they did it 15 years ago, so we've had a lot of time to see what happened there. And what you saw was not only did, of course, arrests and incarceration go down, but drug use went down.
Yeah.
Rehabilitation went up.
What about those that talk about the impact on the growing brain of a young person?
Okay, so that, I knew you were going to say that because the rebuttal for this, and it's always the same thing every time. I'm not saying you're just, but it's always
No,
it's always the children. That's what everybody says. What about the children? What
You have
about,
to remember, old Larry here just being a devil's advocate. Here,
You're
know?
representing the
I'm
public.
just representing. I know where the questions come from,
And-
and I know that when I check my email, why didn't you ask them this? Why ask them that? I'm with you 100%.
And every politician, when they talk about the war on drugs on the campaign trail and any stump speech, is always, what about the children? That's been that way since Reagan really started, and Nancy Reagan started planning those. He'd just say no, and kind of created this hysteria around all of that. But there's enough data now in Portugal that shows, as well as opiate regulation in the UK, that youth use has gone down.
Now,
From a variety of reasons too, and one of them is, and that's what I really want to say is, there is a psychological effect that happens for teenagers when you tell them something is illegal.
Oh, it's no
Right?
question.
When you're a teenager, right, and something's illegal, I
You
want to
would
do
never
it.
know.
God.
You know,
Jeez.
when you tell them it's legal, it's not cool anymore. So, and that's not hyperbole. That is a real, actual, proven thing that's happened.
Oh,
now.
there's no question about it.
Yeah.
I'm the product. I mean, my God,
Yeah.
who wants something that's legal? I mean, my
It's
God.
no fun.
Jeez, why would I go in the front door to get it when I can just sneak in the back door to get it? I mean, that's just human nature. But so, what are some of the things that the average person that's listening to this show, if they want to get involved, can do?
Well, first and foremost, spread the word. Prop 64 is about legalizing marijuana, and it's a tremendous criminal justice reform.
Now, you're involved in the author of this, the author of this bill.
Yeah, we helped write it.
Who are the we?
Drug Policy Alliance, which is the organization that I'm the state director for here in California. We're one of 5 chairs of this campaign, so there's sort of 5 key stakeholders who drafted and are funding the campaign.
What are some of the politicians in the state that is backing this?
Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom is a big supporter of marijuana legalization and is specifically supporting this initiative and has really been a great ally in this, particularly around understanding the terrible impact it's had on our young people, especially our Black and Latino young men.
And so you're battling with the law enforcement and growers. That is
A little less so, but yeah, they're lukewarm.
It's still another straw on the camel's back, you know.
Yes.
So it all kind of adds up to its own weight, And so, what are some of the other obstacles that you are facing with this?
One of the obstacles, which has nothing to do with marijuana, is just the size of the ballot this year. This will be the longest ballot in California's history ever, or maybe since 1950-something. So in a long time, certainly in my lifetime. So we're worried that a lot of people aren't going to go all the way down the ballot. So what can people do? Remember Prop 64. Keep voting till you get to it. Bring your lawn chair, your coffee, take a seat, go all the way down that ballot till you get to Prop 64.
This
Fill
is
it out
about
at home.
awareness. I
Yes.
mean,
Awareness.
This is really, really about pounding the pavement and getting, making people aware of the possibilities here. You was about to say something?
Yes, I was going to say that, and this is the question that I know you hear all the time, is I thought marijuana was already handled. Why are we having another bill about marijuana when I know there's medicinal marijuana available? What's the big deal?
Well, I want to just say one thing about that topic, and from somebody who comes from my culture, for me to say this is like, I don't necessarily have a lot of support, but when you go down to the Venice Boardwalk, right, and you see these guys dressed in the green suits saying, "Come here to get your doctor's evaluation in 15 minutes for $40," that is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I understand.
I agree. It's not a good thing.
That's a great. I understand it's a gateway to get good high potency pot if you want to get stoned, but that is not a good precedent.
Mm-hmm.
That's ruining it for the entire credibility of the medical marijuana industry.
Really?
And absolutely, you can. If you just walk into the Venice Boardwalk doctor and say, "I've got a headache, give me a card," that's not. That ruins the whole purpose and intent and integrity of why we started this movement in the first place. So we don't have it taken care of. We have a facade taken care of. We have, I don't know what the number is, Lynne probably does, but I think it's above 50 to 60% of people who have medical marijuana cards probably shouldn't. Probably should just buy it recreationally. So we have to legitimize
One more piece on that, and I totally agree with that. But the other reason why we haven't taken care of this, 500,000 people have been arrested for marijuana in the last 10 years in California. 500,000 people have been arrested
amazing.
for marijuana. So while it's practically legal for white people, it's not at all legal for Black and brown people, and that is who we have been piping into our criminal justice system
500,000 people
in the last 10 years.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
Well, let me. Now, because we talked about some of these elements that is fighting against the proposition, and the the white elephant in the room now is the churches. What are the churches doing to support you? I'm saying that with a big smile on my face.
No, I love the churches. So, interestingly, Drug Policy Alliance has a long history working with the progressive faith movement. And so they have really come out for this. We've been preparing them for this for many years. And so we have over a dozen big-time faith leaders who are coming out endorsing this initiative. And next week we'll be having our first faith convening, and they want to hit the streets and get out the faith vote. So really, I feel like, I'm sure there's a faith community that's against us, but all the people in the faith community that I know are with us because this is an issue of justice, and they really get that.
I really like the way you have brought it down to not, it's not just about legalizing the substance at this point, but it really is about justice. It really is about fair justice.
Yep.
And because the injustice that I have witnessed in my lifetime, there could be many, many books written about that. Jesus Christ. But, Carolyn, did you have a question? You had that?
No, I was just totally agreeing with just complimenting Lynne on her ability to really get to the point and to help the listeners really understand, and the viewers, the significance of what's at stake here. Because it's really big when you're looking at that many people who have been incarcerated and things on their record, not being able to get jobs, not being able to have housing, having it follow them all their life, to have them separated from their families. It just goes on and on and on and on, and that's the impact on the children that we want to change.
And being caught up in the system is just, once you're in the system, it's so hard to get out.
It's terrible. Because I saw the progression of this impact in the African American community, in the 70s, middle 80s. It was PCP. The world just dumped PCP in the black community. And then from the PCP, there was a thing that was called, we came off the pills, all the different psychedelic pills and stuff in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Then you saw the PCP hit the community like a plague, and then you saw then the dirty, the dirty cocaine in the community. Then we saw the weed start, marijuana, after the devastation of PCP. You started to see marijuana build back up into the African American community in the 80s, where that's where most of the guys I grew up with had said, we're not going to do PCP. Heroin is mostly, I'm talking about California, it's mostly in the white community. So then in the black community, the musicians world and whatever would start the marijuana. In the 80s, I specifically remember they completely shut marijuana out of the black community. You could not get marijuana in the black community. Those that were selling marijuana on the corners, I personally knew some of them. Yes, I knew some of them. Yes, and I went and did business with them. Was completely switched over to crack. You could not get marijuana in South Central for a while.
Wow.
All the marijuana dealers couldn't get their hands on it, and what was given to them was crack. Now you see, after the plague of crack in the black community, we've come out of that plague and now easing back once again, where the young people are, like it or not, are smoking marijuana, and they're looking for better quality than I could get when I was coming. And so now with it being decriminalized, if that's possible, which it is possible, then it would really make a difference in how some of these young people, because marijuana is here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You can pass all the laws and lock as many people up. It's here to stay. But I just thank you so much for putting that in perspective, and I hope I put a little bit of history there and didn't bore anybody.
Great history. Have you seen the Freeway Rick Crack in the System film?
I knew many of those guys.
It's a great film about how the crack got in the hands of every street dealer in the 80s.
Yeah, and a lot of it We ran a liquor store on Hyde Park and West Boulevard, and some of my audience have heard this story before. And we were there where Hyde Park, the park itself, where I had people that was going to the park early in the morning finding bags and bags of bullets. That's how they was, I know where they was on the railroad tracks. I know where they was finding the Uzis, the AK-47s. They were coming through the liquor store. Right behind my liquor store on Hyde Park and West Boulevard, Bryanhurst was the first street crack hit in America. Bryanhurst. The devastation of that street and the devastation of my customers that was coming into my store, I started to see that. And a lot of it was not just amateurs.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask you to explain a little bit about the bags of bullets and things?
Well, yeah.
Because I'm that sounded like it might have been subtle of what would there be bags of bullets for?
Real quick, for the sake of time, I had guys that come in my store and wasn't doing too well. The street hustlers, and one day, one guy, hadn't seen him in a while. He shows up in a brand new car, expensive car. He said, Larry, I said, dude, what, you got a job? He said, no, Larry, come here. I got to show you something. For the sake of time, I'm running through this. Pops his trunk, commercial garbage bags full of bullets, separated. There was bullets for 357s. There was bullets for AK-47. There was bullets for Uzi and some of them. I said, well, where do you get these bullets from? He said, well, don't tell anybody. Over here at Hyde Park, in the garbage can, he said they're throwing them out. He thought that there was someone throwing them in the garbage. But they was actually placing bullets. So when you looked at all those drive-by shootings, ask yourself a question. Not just where did the guns come from? Where did all these bullets come from?
Fascinating.
That's where some of the bullets was coming from.
Well, it's such a huge element behind the war on drugs. And I think any rational person, no matter what side of the fence you're on, I think you could, reasonably say that, do you really think that guns and violence and bullets and deaths should, equal you getting that pot or that cocaine or that crack? I mean,
you see this war on drugs under Reagan and Colonel North and the whole bit. You do remember, I was a part of that generation.
It was a government deal. So, I mean,
Sure
nobody's
it was.
saying it, so I'm just going to say it.
Oh, yes.
The Iran-Contra.
It was a government
It was
deal.
a government deal, and
Some was
and
allowed
Ricky
in.
Ross will tell you the story of how he worked, with a particular man who was paid by the CIA.
Yes.
To bring the cocaine and the weapons into Los Angeles. So what I think we need to be calling for are Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, because our communities still haven't recovered from that, which was a direct government action. Again, regardless of who, and nobody has ever, Oliver North is the only one, I think, who did any prison time. There's a lot of other current government officials who are implicated. And just like we call for truth and reconciliation in Rwanda and in other countries, we need it right here in America.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love this, and I tell my listeners, no matter where you are in the country, because some of you are outside the country, but here in America, vote.
Yes.
Get out
Absolutely.
and vote.
Absolutely.
Go, and the most important thing to remember is that this is a great example of voting county, town, city, state, and for your president. Because there's so much going on in our communities that we just let slide under, and I'm going to call it what it is, because you're lazy. You don't want to sit there. You want to complain about what's going on in your community. You want to complain about what the laws are doing against you, not for you, but you won't get your butt out and take your time to vote. So get out there and vote. And Larry's, and I said that. Was there anything else you'd like to add to that? Jarvis, how much time we got here? We got 5. We got 5 minutes to play around with here. I am so enjoying this, and thank you guys for coming on here. I've
Thank you
learned
so
so
much.
much. And so, Carolyn, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to make a comment that even though we focused on California today, because it's Prop 64 here, there are drug reform laws and bills being placed all around the country, and the impact is the same. the challenges that you hear about on the radio and TV in Chicago and Atlanta and all major cities, the impact on black youth and Hispanic youth is the same. They're being jailed. They're dealing with a war on drugs and consequences that are affecting their life and the lives of their children.
Absolutely. And I think what a lot of the time we forget, it's not just the stress on the economy of the jail system and the prison system and the whole bit, but then when these people careers are ruined, their possibilities of building a life is possibly ruined, and there go another level of stress that is back on the community, which is back on the state.
That's right.
And reduced revenue because they can't pay taxes because they don't get jobs. There's one piece I wanted to add that we didn't touch on, so I'll just mention it.
Please, go ahead.
Which is who is going to make money in this new commercial marijuana system. So
I thought I asked that, but go right ahead.
no, I mean like who, this is the new, they're calling it the green rush. It's the new gold rush. The marijuana industry is already worth billions of dollars, and with legalization in California, we're more than doubling the size. So there's a lot of money to be made, and equity in licensing remains one of our top concerns. So what we really don't want to see is what Michelle Alexander called out, which is that white men get rich off of what black and brown boys been going to jail for many decades. So we have to make sure that we open up this industry and the riches that are available within it to all communities. We in our medical marijuana system, we have very few people of color, very few women in ownership or managerial positions. So we are going to be working hard even after the election to make sure that those licenses and all the money that people want to be able to make is accessible to everybody and not just to a few folks who got there first.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I didn't go into detail as much about it when I was talking about the growers and the small outlets and the small dispensers and stuff, because I know how hard it is for some of the African American males. I know just a couple that got dispensers or whatever, but it's been very hard for them to get into the game. And so I really appreciate you addressing that. We're looking at watches and clocks and times and stuff like that. So we got two. Zach, please.
Closing thought, vote.
Well, we got a second for the closing thought. I just wanted to see, did you want to mention, step in on what we were just saying about the...
Oh, fascinating topic for sure, and I think there's a lot of hysteria and misinformation about it. So I encourage everyone to actually look up the facts. But my closing thought is vote. There are 70 million people who do not vote in this country, and imagine what a different country this would be if those 70 million people voted.
Well, we have the numbers on our side if we just get out and vote.
That's right. We do for so many things.
And we're at the end of the show, and I want to thank you guys so very much. This has been really educational, eye-opening, and exciting. And please come back after the vote, see what we talked about, see what happened.
Let's do it.
And anything that I can do to support, call, hit me up. Get me involved. I might want to get one of those dispensers there. I'm just kidding. My friends in Grenada, Mississippi, don't send me no message saying Larry don't do it. Anyway, give us some closing wisdom here.
Well, I just remind people that voting on November 8th is critical, but what happens after the vote is just as critical, because we pass laws all the time and then nothing happens. So we have to implement those laws. That $1 billion isn't just going to arrive on our doorsteps. We're going to have to fight for every penny. The governor's really good at stealing money that we create through these initiatives. So we need to make sure that we're following the money. We need to make sure we're following who gets those licenses. So participate, and participating in your locality is where it's going to be at, because each city can implement this the way they want to. So you need to get involved with your city government, be active, be engaged after November 8th. And if anybody has a marijuana record who's listening right now, please go to our website and register with us. So that's legalizeca2016.com. We will be holding our first Freedom Fest on election night. At midnight, we will start changing records at 12:01 p.m. on November 8th. And then we'll be running clinics like that across the state for a long time. So get yourself plugged in with us now.
I love it. Carolyn, you want to say a few words?
I just want to add to please vote. This is being consciously aware of what we have the opportunity to do. It's a privilege to vote, and we want to make sure that we're doing that and take advantage. We talked about this being justice. It's economic justice.
Mm-hmm.
So take advantage of an opportunity to invest in your life and the lives of our children.
I just want to thank you, Zach, Lynn, and I didn't butcher the name up too bad. Carolyn, thank you so much for finding these wonderful guests, and I just so appreciate the people that you bring to the show, and this just make me feel like this is why I do this. Anyway, no matter who you are or where you sit on this thing right now, if you need to do your research, do it. If you want to study this process, study it. Get involved. Let your voice be heard. Not just for the president, that's very important, but we got to be focused on what's happening in our community. And your dollar, your thoughts, your vote is much more powerful than any gun you can pick up. This is Larry Yates. Remember, a nation can rise no higher than it elevates its woman. This is Larry Yates. Boom. See you next week.
Now let me welcome everybody.